All right, apologies for the delay. Let's start with Dhamma Sankappa Guru. From the heart of the sever of the 100 deities of Bodhichitta on the peak of cloud resembling a clump of screaming white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, Nisimlosantrapa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me on the lion throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit from the mind of faith, please abide for 100 eons to spread the teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech with its excellent explanation is an ear ornament of those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful and glory renowned. To you, or meaningful to see, hear, and remember are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, light-scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the 3 vows that collected from beginning to time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the worldly concerns. Sever will sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect pure holy gurus from the billion clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of Dhammakaya, please let fall a rain of fine and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigrate to the beings. And in particular, may it cause the essence of countless teachings to shine forever. Sashi Proki Jushime Rabdishi Nidege Padi Sanyeshindo Mikte Uwa Giro Kunanda Shinla Chupashu. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lamrim Kappa and his 2 sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of victorious one, Losang Drachma, where the morality of an eminently pure way of life was courageous and extensive conduct of the sons of the victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of 2 stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kandiyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, all beings of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one and 10 like crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of the tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirits, harms, negative karmas, and aspirations, and the imprints without exceptions. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. In page 13, we're going to recite the Mixima verse 3 times. Mete wete chen chen rezi, jene kembe wambo jambe yang dosun, jonze samwe da, kanche kembe tsugen tsangapa, lo sandra pe shabla soade. Mete wete chen chen rezi, jene kembe wambo jambe yang dokuma le jonze samwe, kanche kembe tsugen tsangapa, lo sandra pe shabla soade. Mete wete chen chen rezi, jene kembe wambo jambe yang domu jonze samwe da, kanche kembe tsugen tsangapa, lo sandra pe shabla soade. Chona Zoe Chonam Chachu Badu Bani Kazuchi Damichi Matsona Rola Vichi Sange Dopasho Chachu Badu Bani Kazuchi Dai Geshe Yewa Zami Tola Penche Samye Rupa Shu Chonran Sogi Chon Chanchu Badi Dai Geshe Yewa Zami Tola Penche Samye Rupa Shu
강기 교재에 놓인 따라 정치 방법을 방법을 변수 어떤 자가 상승으로
I think it's not my day today. Maybe it's time to go home. Open the book, and then the fan just hit the page. Where are we at the moment? All right. Anyway.
일단은 람룸 이 시골 람룸 이 람룸 이 지금 그 산지위치 되리야 그 체중이 있는 대표 친구의 최제단의 버럭이 마 아니 세우시 대셔 이 람룸 세우시요.
So on the Friday morning teachings, we've been looking at an explanation of the Lamrim, the steps of the path of enlightenment. So of the two sets of teachings that the Buddha gave, Hinayana teachings and Mahayana teachings, this set of teachings belongs to the Mahayana, teaching us the steps of practice in a very clear way. And contribute so guarantee so danger so the should get he should the long he know that Java to go to long team that give some should and now yes could still right and you test major so about the what this is the chance. So then if we want to develop our daily practice, if we on a daily basis read through the Lamrim, think of the Lamrim, the steps of the path of enlightenment, Geshe reckons that everything will work out well in a you can say in a satisfactory way. In developing that is a Buddhist practice. In that when we look at the way that the Lamrim presents the steps of the path, there is no mistake with respect to the order of practice. Everything is found in a complete sense, but also the teachings in the Lamrim are concise. In that, when we look at the great teachings that the Buddha gave, we have the Kangyu, the collection of teachings that the Buddha gave, and also the collection of commentaries that were composed by Indian masters and such. And those teachings are very extensive. Here we have Lama Tsongkhapa's middling presentation of the steps of the path of enlightenment, which means that, first of all, it provides us with a concise presentation of all those extensive teachings, and also it includes all the key points from these teachings. And there are no major issues or problems giving or issuing forth debates or arguments with respect to the points that are taken from those teachings. So particularly this text, the Middling Lamrim for us, provides a really good manual for practice.
the culture is so various, the big order, the culture is so various, and so they were to do not say it. The Digi, they do them and leave the 70 years to say they do say it. And Digi, the penal, they really join the same condition to you. Do not dissolve the same condition to you. Digi, do not use the and a channel also to the others. The D and the beginning rituals, the traditional rituals, channel. The D says, and it Yamni with the tension, but the Geshe and data, and Geshe and data of the previous.
Lamrim Kappa's text teaching us in order what are the things that we need to put into practice. So it provides us with a sequential practice. And you might wonder, how does it work? For what reason is it arranged in this way? Well, first of all, in recognizing that we're seeking happiness and we want to avoid suffering, it teaches us the way to accomplish happiness or to cultivate happiness and not to eliminate, to dispel our suffering. And as such, the main thing that is addressed is the mind. You can say that the main emphasis on the text in terms of removing suffering or dispelling suffering is how to do it on a mental level. So how is it that our happiness depends upon the mind and also the suffering depends on the mind? When we look at the origins of suffering, we can say that suffering is dependent upon the mind, that from anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth, we end up experiencing suffering. And this is the point that is made understood in a text such as this. So since suffering depends upon the mind, it originates from our afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth. Here, this text teaches us in order how to develop our practice. As such, definitely, or 100% certain that this is the way that we need to put things into practice in order to rid ourselves of such suffering.
And this the new with the Mondan and it ran the game was some there, and it knew we should children. Chavo should children, Chavi, and it's Shatan here, so Tato here, so the truth are the thing marriage, but the king is told that new gear to yourselves. The new countries gave on teacher. New countries teacher, and a carbon that they are carbon to the traveling, travel to Mount Providence. The Namasani which you know, the dish
The purpose of the Buddha Dharma is to overcome our anger, attachment, and ignorance, and it provides us with method for doing so. If we focus on our own purpose alone, only on our own welfare or purpose, it will cause our afflictive states of mind to increase. Anger will become stronger, hatred, jealousy, and so forth. All of them, and ignorance also will increase. And when afflictions arise in our mind, we experience more problems.
But this sound also, Ramdir sound said the one washi and local chong, and it only time to shoes chaos, and it ran check that Chawchi learned on to and that the guy mom should check it. Drag Magas mom should know that. Things are that's run that maybe Tell your machine, Shena Migi, and it says so much jump by now. And it did some of rock, yeah, we did some of dog writing, and it never signed with share. So, there was a share on that. And this is so good.
If we focus solely on our own purpose, only on our own benefit, you could say when it becomes kind of a, you can say kind of a high level or high measure, we might be interested in the affairs that belong to this lifetime only. Now, you can say indeed that kind of seeking one's own welfare alone could lead to the development of the wish to attain the state of liberation, which will then lead you to the attainment of liberation from taking a rebirth, from life after life after life. You can say that this is a high level of development, but setting that aside, when we look at the strong wish to accomplish our own benefit, our own welfare, you can say a selfish attitude that is focused on affairs of this lifetime only. The greater we focus on the welfare of this lifetime only, the more we can see that we find it difficult to deal or to face with small things or trivial things that arise for us in this life. If we cannot really give up, we cannot relinquish our pursuit of trivial things, simple things that belong to this lifetime only, we'll have more complications in our life, we will have more conflicts, we'll create more enemies and so forth. If we train in love, on the other hand, then we'll be able to rid ourselves of all those unwanted things.
These are really and send to much TV, and it get a match to myself. Million should be get a match to the dealing of layer, terminals, only some Sam Mongion, so and she take Nangi, the Yaya, and Chakoshi, he told the down for second so. And Kevin actually do not be shoot children, do not tell you that you will the only your chimney and chicken metabol big. Next day, some count to and Kevin actually do not be my ranching in no rest. Chixomas, there are things to the kitchen on service from the city number.
If we only focus on affairs of this lifetime only, we'll have more mental suffering. And particularly when we look at the mental suffering or the mental pain that we experience as human beings, for us, the main form of mental suffering lies within the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death. So we experience those forms of suffering anyway: birth, sickness, aging, and death. But then on top of that, if our orientation is such that we focus mainly or only on this lifetime only, we add another layer of suffering on top of what is already there. The mind becomes confused. Due to confusion, states such as anger, aversion, and so forth arise. So then we find that we have more suffering, more than the suffering that we already have with birth, sickness, aging, and death. So in relation to that, it is useful to think of impermanence. If we can think of impermanence, we'll be able to reduce the anguish or the suffering that we experience in relation to these states of birth, sickness, aging, and death.
Go and give teaching money, give everything to words. I see, but you are ready, once you give, and kill the that changes, but the that changing you are there, and it telling is sem magawas, sem dunga lembrina. Tadi Geshe kya tumi insa. Tadi manuya, pigi kewa shiva, kewa di doctor menaya. Dia nyamdo, ani magi dunga sem yongya ya, gautam jiya Geshe kya Things and chum tall, something chum tall. Kimchi, get a nachi, send donor be the doctor one than the system all over. The soldiers that he wanted nature and the Kazan days in our
So we experience inevitable birth, inevitable sickness, inevitable aging, and inevitable death, in that we cannot put a stop to them at the moment. And often we experience more suffering in relation to them. And when we fail to recognize that this is the nature of our life in being born, not having been able to overcome birth, sickness, aging, and death, this is the nature of our life. So it says that when, if you're born, you will necessarily die. This is the nature of things. Something that is produced, something that is born, inevitably will die. So we think about the nature of change in relation to that, and this is the nature of this life. And yet, when we experience the inevitable suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death, the mind becomes unhappy. We develop a sense of dislike to those states, even though we cannot really avoid it. So there's something that we cannot avoid, but on top of that, we develop a sense of dislike, unhappiness with respect to it, which means that it compounds our mental suffering. So what we here doing with recognizing the nature of change, impermanence, is we first of all put a stop to the additional suffering that we add to the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death. And this is a method that we acquire, unerring method that we acquire when we put the Dhamma into practice. Since we were born, we will definitely age. From birth, we experience aging. This is our nature as living beings. This is the nature of beings of the 6 realms of existence. So not only it is valid for us as human beings, but it is also the case for other things like plants, flowers, and so forth. So then when we recognize our reality, when we recognize the way that we exist, and thus from the moment of birth, we start aging, our mind will stop being unhappy about it. This suffering attributed to suffering, unhappiness, and sense of malaise that comes with aging will be reduced when we recognize that this is the nature of our existence. Whatever is born goes through a process of aging and then dies. So certainly, definitely, there's a benefit in thinking about it like that.
양격이 깨어들어야 랑기 깨어들어야 팽비기 자와지 세디 토야 가르주투르에서 방송에 재활이었어. 내가 팽비기 자와지 세디에 주에 요도 봤으면 야시야다. 그러면서 아니 메토디 마기고 메토디 야부기야 메토디 마기고 빌려야 주주에요. 시가로지면 시가 써진 마기고 시가 야부기야 체도 신가 마기고는 traditional 지어요 맛이 먼저 기어 양자 마기고 기어 들려야 기어 지미 체도 때때 자기 지어요 데 아니 디토가 성당은 때 기어 지미 정세 이래서 데 남산이 소리야 참가 직송도 왔어.
But then if we'd be able to prevent death from occurring, we'll also be able to prevent suffering of aging, sickness, and death. But currently we're unable to prevent death from occurring, so we can at least make sure that the next death that will occur in a good way, in a good fashion. So it is the same as, for example, if you are planting some seeds in the field. If you prepare the field well, if there is very good preparation for the next season, and then you plant seeds, then you have a much better way of making sure that the yield, the harvest would be better than in the case of making no preparations whatsoever. The same thing can be said with respect to our future rebirth. There are ways for us to make preparations for future rebirths, that the next rebirth would be a good one.
신승전 탐지기 있어도 아니 성 야채도 땅이야 아니 대문치는 주스 그래서 다른 좀 풀어줘야지 남주 야채시든가 아니 남주다 남산이 위치처럼 찌니지 아니 대문치는 위치 제공도 소야지 다들 손도 다른 같은 데야 얘는 최 대문치 위치에 최초도 줘야지 최이게 아니 대부치 주의서 강사대 택침을 수업시 같이 수수 상고대 대부치 상고대 수업 아니 백희친구를 송다스라.
So then if our focus is placed on this side, or focus is just to goal is just to attain a good state of rebirth in our next life, it is considered to be a lesser type of dharma. Whereas if our focus is on the welfare of other human beings, it's considered to be, first of all, a focus or practice that is involved with the Mahayana, but also a greater type of wisdom, a greater type of intelligence is developed and is maturing. And this is the type of wisdom and intelligence that we develop among the Mahayana. This is what Lamrim says somewhere. Where's the text? This is what it says here. If the mind exists even in someone untrained in bodhisattva conduct, it is said to be a bodhisattva. Therefore, it is not sufficient for the Dharma to be Mahayana Dharma, but rather it is important that the person has entered the Mahayana.
the same picture some down and then Ramdi Ramdi is Tamatuma and then Shinju some down to say Kamushu. How do and church only was Lamrim Zavadi just a chamber song, and you won't area 2 years. So 2 years. That the Namoya should become so close. Should become so close. So that should become CD to get down mean the sofa, chickpea, chick, Susu, Namro, Tony, any sham the time for did the time for Eva. So she did check Yagi, sorry by the young, sure to the time was this time, and it should not draw your voice. This is so that.
So in order to develop the attitude of this seeking the welfare of others, the benefit of others, we need to be able to give up on our own welfare. If we can't really give up the pursuit of our own welfare primarily, we'll not be able to develop the mind that is seeking the welfare of others. We'll not be able to do much. So when we look at this set of teachings on the steps of the path of enlightenment, they're based on Matreya's fundament of clear realization. And in relation to the set of teachings, it is the type of attitude that you develop in your Dharma practices that you would be willing to give up even on your own life for the sake of the Dharma, for the sake of your practice. Which means looking at affairs that belong to this life, the pursuit of the food and drinks and clothing and social interactions, reputations, things that you really like, things that you don't really like. Needless to say that we need to give up, to relinquish the pursuit of those things which are solely oriented towards this life. So needless to say that we need to give up on them, but here it says in relation to this Dharma practice, which is based on Matreya's element of pure realization, is the attitude should be that not only we give up on those things that belong to this life, but we'll be even willing to give up our own life for the sake of a Dharma practice. And if we're incapable of doing that, without doing that, we are not going to be able to practice the Dharma purely.
Kansa Rami teaching to what she was like, Bemas Yahodasa. So the teacher said, can't lot of Chimbu, Kivich. They do Karchombaina, Kama Karchombaina, and don't cheat. Can't let me Kansa Jetta, that did Kansa Chavana, and Mazu we said now Yako, and Kekanachi. They don't carry the Yoga. Some of the each however, I know the cabin show miles. One of the Gamation and Sam Shim. Energy younger some of the church was.
So can you hear me? All right. Is it better now? People at home? Is it better? Is it better? Anyway, so Geshe is saying that for the sake that this is what Dhamma is saying here. Therefore, it is not sufficient for the Dhamma to be Mahayana Dhamma, but rather it is important that the person has entered Mahayana. It's a very nice way of saying that. It's not enough of whatever we practice to be a Mahayana practice. It is also important that our attitude as persons that put it into practice would be a Mahayana attitude. It is important that the person is also a person that has entered the Mahayana. And if we develop that Mahayana attitude of a person that has entered into the Mahayana vehicle, we'll be able to take on difficulties that we will experience along the way. And this is what we need to do when we develop the Mahayana attitude. We need to be able to develop the willingness to take on, to willingly take up difficulties and complications, but we work for the sake of others.
Teacher for Chebayans, Chanju is 7 years, Ravin now, 70 courts on the Yana, teaching by a Tendagala, 76 on Shiana, teaching by a 지금이 늘어가려 차왔어.
So then Lama Tsongkhapa says, whether you become a Mahayanist depends on Bodhichitta itself. If that mind is no more than an intellectual understanding, your being a Mahayanist is the same. On the other hand, if you have fully qualified Bodhichitta, you will also become a completely pure Mahayanist.
이 샘디 아니 가서다 뭐 아니 샘디 계획을 써버리 먼저다 준비했으니까 교육을 해서 그냥 또이 잔주 샘세디 가르스니 잔주 샘 저기 인지를 토레스 그럼 인지 슬라운디 아니 선자 탐지 먼저지 아니 간지 속사 열도죠 아니 내가 동안 문제가 아니 지금 총 이게 진짜 탐질을 해. 그럼 탐질을 해. 동화도 탐지만 예, 탐지 동화도 탐지만 예. 저기 자주 무슨 싸워졌어.
Some people at home say that it's very hard to hear. Let's try this. All right. Can you hear me now? How about now? Can you hear me? I'm not sure. All right. Anyway, Geshe said that here when we are looking at the Mahayana practice, we're looking at a practice which is based on Bodhichitta, the mind of enlightenment, which is rooted in compassion. It's based on compassion. We recognize all human beings as being equal, being the same in terms of seeking happiness and well-being, wanting to avoid suffering. This is what our Mahayana practice is based on.
디지털 남쪽에 아니 소수생의 신분이 제대로 거야지. 그러다 장수생이 너무 쉬운 소화. 이제 봐야나. 아니 인지 상반티 싸워니니. 땅모로와지. 하장 제대로 거야지라. 간선은 아주 까불까라 지 수수다 따오면 준사. 안직 소소라야 수직 아니 직 나고라야라 소바. 아니 직 어딘지 체온 얘기. 아니 인지 냠야기. 수수 규인지 수수 규기 잔주sem비 동발로 소바 랑아주 페나 소더기 동발로지 나가주 페나 게촌오지만다 니 규기 동발 뉴글 삼바이나 가르치고 주는 치라 된난신기 아니 잔주sem비 동발로 있나요 딜을 하가지 제대치고야지 차고라서 잔주sem비 동발로야 네버 쪼디 닌지 냠나 잔주sem비 동발 냠고레스 닌지 여바이나 아니 잔주sem비 동비 싸워도 죽도면서 아니 인지들의 하장기 찌르치고 다 대부분 비추기 심한로도 차도스러
So in taking care of our mind of enlightenment, our bodhicitta, we need to take care of our compassion. So when, for example, when we protect our bodhisattva vow, we need to protect or to care for the development of our compassion. So for example, we might have taken a pratimoksha vow, a vow of personal liberation, and in whatever we do, we make sure that we do not violate the vow that we have. Even more so, we should take care of our bodhisattva vow. So if our compassion declines, it will harm the bodhisattva vow that we have. And therefore, the very basis for our practice of bodhicitta and the practices of bodhisattvas is compassion. This is what we need to guard. This is what we need to nurture.
Tene ninji samba ki ondi ninji samba ki gubi gyunzen ro di khare restan di deva mundeba da dungar mundeba somba gyunzen de chene dunga da na chi maro nyambe lo ta ki go dos mado sozula yabu chi bichane ninji ki go da sozu da ta mindim bichane ninji ki mo go yel so tinji ne su tsawni ne maro was ro tinza ani ninji ki gubi gyunzen di pasho me dewan degu yobatan dungan degu meba gyunzen di soni ani ninji ki go ta dinji gi ninji di kazu shuk chambo chi yobayin bai na pu tabu chi yobayin na di tsugi ani ninji ki sa gi yul di chedro kar le tang go chona le tang tuge chi kandiz kali gyagu chona ya kali gyab tuge di tsawa ninji le ra le do as ra le go res.
And we generate compassion in recognizing the equality of all sentient beings, the sameness in terms of seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering. This is the reason that we use for the development of compassion. And when we use that reason for developing compassion, the reason would be recognizing the equality of all living beings in terms of seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering. We will not exclude others from a sense of compassion in that. We will not be thinking that I don't need to develop compassion to that person because I disagree with them, or that I don't need to develop compassion to that person because they cause me pain. When we recognize the equality of all sentient beings, we will use that as a firm foundation for the development of compassion. And when we then develop compassion to others on that basis, we'd be able to relinquish some things in order to be able to be of benefit to them. We'd be able to face difficulties and to deal with complications when we develop compassion towards them.
Terdiza nganzu yak teba ina nganzu shengi chedo kali gyama tuya shen ya sobo goma tuya ani shen ya chik dukjan thonde di kyen samalo cheshu di sosu gyugi ani shen la zevi sambadi mantam wanki yungu yobati gyacha gyata bares ro pena imba di kharesna pena machik lamrim nalo pe chu shay chigla machik la ya shindu yidongwi ta chik pu yakbu chig yobana pu tel ya zevi zewa shuji yongu rasta dinji ge mati pu ti ge dungali kyebi chedo ani pi chula chomgo na re mela chomgo na re kawa la chomgo na 태좀 싸우니 요 말이에요. 내가 가서 제가 레마바디 제가 요반자 뒤도 제도 그래서 드리송도 왔어요. 대나신 그 가서 섬제 비게 오늘 전 대화도 동감문도 균선지 전에 인지 상바 약부지 요바나 아니 시행기 제도 가르려 당고 좋네요. 가르치고 좋네요. 제통인기 로드들 내고 그랬어. 디 대바친 비게 강사 차야기 규다 메타메디 디직 차가도 왔어요.
And if we develop that sense of care for others, we'll be able to deal with difficulties or with the complications of practicing, cultivating certain things. Whereas if we do not have the attitude that is seeking the benefit of others, we'll not be able to put up with difficulties, to work hard. We'll still be considering some people as being evil or bad and so forth. When we find that we cannot work hard, that we cannot continue with the practice, that we see other people as bad or negative, it for us can be an indication of not having enough compassion or care for others. One common example that is common in the Lamrim tradition is an example of love that a mother has for her own child, one child, in that the love is so strong and that mother would be able to do anything in order to protect that child. She'd be able to leap into fire, to jump into raging water in order to save her only child. A mother is able to do that because of that strong sense of love and care for her child. So when we then develop compassion to others, care for others, in recognizing the equality of all living beings in seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering, we'll also be able to develop the courage, the bravery in facing difficulties, and also having to give up certain things in order to be able to work for the welfare of others. So that becomes an indispensable cause for the development of our bodhicitta and bodhisattva practices.
Tere dinsa dinti ta karso ta nguyo nizu rawa, ta nguyo nizu rangda rawa, dewa deba, dungar mun deba, chigi gyur yinba di, ani ngebi toni, pesho mi dungar dugu meba, dungar da chana, ani gawa yoba di, tongwi toni ta, dungar da chana chimaru nyambi lo di, yoba ina di tobji, ani chigi susu dungar li trawa ya, tab ya zomba nangshi, shen dungar li trawa ya, ani tab ya zombi ki sambati yungu yores. Ta digi chedu, simjian tamji dungar li trawa ya nguye tungi ki nipa di, chigi sanji kona la yobanza, di chedu sanji komba ya zombi ki sambati chanju ku sem, tebo chimbi ki ta sabyon ri sayadi, o diris, dindi ki chigi lakbi sambati la ya, ani chanju ku sem se gores, ra, chanju ku sem se gores.
We recognize that sentient beings are just like me. I want to be happy. I do not want to suffer. And other sentient beings are just like me. And just like I wish for myself to be free from suffering, also I should wish for others to be free from suffering. May they be free from suffering. And just like I take actions in order to make sure that I free myself from suffering, also I should do it for the sake of others, in order to protect them from suffering. But in terms of liberating everyone from suffering, only a Buddha has the ability to do so. And therefore, we develop bodhicitta in thinking, may I attain the state of Buddhahood, may I become a Buddha in order to free all living beings from suffering. This is what we call bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, which is rooted in compassion.
Dilaya dombuka bales. Rigibu chanju semni, sanji chutamji sabentago, she sombala, Nibani Gube, Tersheba Chavos.
Therefore, you should make an effort, Lama Tsongkhapa says, when with respect to this, the marvelous Array Sutra says, child of the lineage, bodhicitta is like the seed of all the Dharma of the Buddha.
Tirda, that's Pena Sabian Slaundi, Pena Azuda, and Jurigla Soba, Pena Jeda, Pig, Troda, and it Gemala Soba, the Yoras, that the Zug is Sabian D, Susulayan, Tuma Maimbi, Sabian Yungoras, Hilaya Ken, Chuda, Treda, Luda, Tachi, and Nuela Soba, Mamuchi, Ken Chigodina, two Sabian D, and the Rarang Sabian Gogoras, Jeg Sabian Laya, Chulu Trashella Sobi, Kenchini, and the Trokia di Missiwajiras. Any Tilian Jaki Yungrimato, Troki Maras. Then Nanshingi, and Teba Chimbu Chugi, Tobja Tatuwa, Sanji Kombantigi, and Sabian Tavadi, and Chanju Sem there is. Chanju Sem. The Dip Mebaina, Chanju Sem the Mebaina, and Shin Karangi. Da mebalo soba ani kandachi gomba yimba inaya jebu sanji kombandi top dug mares kansen digi su ani saben tawogi chanju gusamdi keran le meba insa dug mares this is thing injimi ditang about the shingo res.
It is said here that bodhicitta is like the seed of all the Dhamma of the Buddha. It is like a seed. So we might have seeds of different types of grains. And for those seeds to germinate and then to grow into a certain plant or harvest, they need certain conducive conditions. They need water and sunlight and warmth and food and so forth. But mainly what they need is their respective seeds. In that, suppose that you have a seed of rice. You provide it with all the conducive conditions, with water, sunlight, warmth, food, and so forth. Wheat will not grow from a seed of rice. It is impossible for wheat to grow from a seed of rice. So each grain, you could say, has its own respective seed. Similarly here, when we look at the dhammas of the Buddha, the dhammas of the Buddha here, says in this sutra, grow from the seed of bodhicitta. So they need the seed of bodhicitta, without which it doesn't matter how long you might meditate on the view of selflessness, you will not be able to become a Buddha without the seed of bodhicitta.
Tell us, Shulu Tredan, Salasovani, Jigi Sabendan, Sona, Jigi Nugu Chela, Trodan, Semala Sobe, Saben the Sona, Tedaki Nugu Chebe, Tedan Guntumoinos, the treasures of Guntumoino. Negi Sabeni, Kin Sudan Soja, Jealous of Nugu Murovena, Morove, Negi Nugu Tumomayan, Guntumo. Number Yilas. These Simbi Chuluga Soja, Negi Nugu Juku attention to Lame Chanjuki 7, Sanji Nugu Yu Nani, 7th of Tumai Yinla, Tony Tobi Seremni, Chulu Sodan Java, Chanju Sungi Gun Tomoinos.
This will be explained because it is necessary to gain certainty about it, since water, manure, heat, soil, and so forth act as causes for the rice sprout when combined with the rice grain, and as causes for sprouts of wheat, pulses, and so forth when combined with the respective seeds. There are common causes. Since the barley seed is not suitable as a cause of rice sprout and so forth, even if the conditions are gathered together, it is the uncommon cause of a barley sprout, while the water, manure, and so forth that cooperate with it are the common causes of the barley sprout. Similarly, amongst the causes for a Buddha sprout, the mind of unsurpassed enlightenment, like the seed, is the uncommon cause, whereas the wisdom realizing emptiness, like the water, manure, and so forth, is the common cause of the three types of enlightenment.
Tishir the Gulamale Yang, take Chin Lamu, 7 Sheron, Sanji Chuye Matang, She, Keba Chola, Mebani, Pai 7 Tang, Dame Dobe Sheron, Mother Sonde, Pena, the Pedicans killing a machine, Pena Papella, put care her so, give me sick be, Pani Pu Rigni, Gunila, Ma.
That is why the Sublime Continuum says, conviction in the Supreme Vehicle is the seed. Wisdom is the mother that gives birth to the qualities of enlightenment. This means that conviction in the Supreme Vehicle is like a father's seed, and the wisdom realizing selflessness is like the mother. For instance, and Geshe says that here it works in terms of Tibetan culture, Tibetan or Indian culture, probably we would view it differently here. So how well this example works here, let's see. It says, for example, since a Tibetan father cannot have a child who is Indian, Chinese, or Mongolian, the father is the cause that determines the lineage. On the other hand, the Tibetan mother is like the common cause, since she can give birth to all kinds of children.
Ludwig Gangs, Sangye Ransan Genamda, Nyandanam Jing Edempa, Tarvilam, Jigni, Janda Meji Chavangi, Sheshan la Debe, Nyaran Namjan, Telatena, Tena Sheshan la Yum Shejan Sombe, Teva Chejon Niki, Sigi Yum Imbe, Tony Dobe, Sheriff Teva Chejon, Jeba Mingi, Chanju is Samdan, Joba Love Cheva Namji Jeba Inde, Renjin Chamale, 년도 대바 텔레는 잔주 메메말론 잔주 세메말론다 저번 용어 마시티 잔주 삼바 칼은 교시 따위 미치시 제비 체월 송소 대들 돈이도 비셔르지 티진 길람 토모 마임바 민규나 텔리진 빌람 남자 따치 메장 지구 디실 잔주 셈비 담반 텔 존니 종고소스.
In his praise to the perfection of wisdom, Nagarjuna also says that Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas equally rely on it. Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas definitely rely on you. Singular path to liberation, it is true to say there is no other. That is why the perfection of wisdom is also known as the mother. Since it is the mother of the sons of both the Mahayana and Hinayana, it is not the wisdom realizing emptiness that differentiates the Mahayana and Hinayana. Rather, Bodhichitta and vast conduct differentiate them. In Precious Galen, their Nagarjuna sticks, they are also taught to be differentiated not by view but by conduct. The Shravaka vehicle does not explain the Bodhisattva's aspiration, conduct, or complete dedications. How could they become Bodhisattvas?
데르다 간지 드레 진짜 당한주 대바 침비기 취 지기여 반자 대바 침비기 취 지기여서 원내기 대바 침부 텔레야 추바지 다 고그러 다디 고야라야 디 체도 당한주기 빼나 잔주sem비 동보시고요레 상하고 동보시고요레 상하고 취시고요레 다디 슈니 게츠는 그 동반난시기 상하기 잔주 대바 침비기 잔주sem비 동발로 써봐 상하고 동발로 써봐 디 난시 딜 하가지 아니 지리지 치마도 봐이나 아니 비다지 소들 동발을 하가지 잔주심비 동발 랭 고에 거려 말아 디 랭니 동발 디딜 하가지 지리지 치마도나 소들 동발 템비 제불을 하가지 아니 잔주심비 동발 템비 제불도 톱투고요 말해 먼저 디 고고요 반자 다디 랭고라서 림비치는야 가지 탈투바 취 약슈 지야기 돌아야 배준치 거다 디 배준치는 주변 조디 취 약슈 자와디 카렌도 닌지인자 닌지 삼바 찬죽샘 로디 이지미다 뒤 원에 저는 아주 뒤쪽 강 총바디 디 돌아야 삼로 땅토바나 근데 원에 타네기 셋데데 치마탐젤이야 아니 팽야디 디송도 스라 간지 태버치 아니 산지 취 원에 송디 디송고다 다 디송고다라
And therefore, we should cherish, we should appreciate the value of compassion. Particularly when we look at the different levels of practices that we take up, either in relation to our own personal liberation or Mahayana practice, even more so with tantric practice, the practice of the second mantra, in which we might take upon ourselves the Bodhisattva vow and then the mantra vow. If we don't appreciate the value of compassion and bodhicitta, we will not gain the preciousness of the bodhisattva vow and also of the tantric vow. So we might take upon ourselves a vow of personal liberation, the pratimoksha vow. Without taking care of our compassion, we will not be gaining, without taking care of the practice of the cultivation of compassion, we will not be gaining much by taking upon ourselves the bodhisattva vow of the tantric vow. They're all based on the development of compassion. So then in terms of the practice that we take up and the different levels of practices that we take up, the best Dhamma practice that we could take up is a practice which is based on compassion. So we spend some time, however long we can spend on the development of compassion, it will give us the benefit of making a practice to be an excellent practice. Not only it benefits our practice, but it will also be beneficial to us in this life as well as in future lifetimes.
다드니 딘디기 찬주 셈 다니지기 싸워진기 다 찬주 셈다 칸르스키 고레 셋 니발로 숨셋 셈디 지들기비 출셋 라 칸르스키 고레스 라운디 찬주 셈 좀이 럼바 기비체 초기 소미 출다 비기 동바송 찬주 셈 깨네 아니 쪼발라고 공디 아니 찬주 셈이 동바송 거다 딘디기 송출다 또 사제숨 디다 nghe gọi ta đi sử dụng cái rồi chẳng chịu xem là lo giang thì ta sao chỉ đi sử dụng thon ta drogo gọi là rồi.
Therefore, if even the wisdom realizing emptiness is not a path unique to the Mahayana, what need is there to mention other paths? For that reason, it is necessary to train in bodhicitta, having made instructions on it one's main concern. That being the case, let's look at the next section that explains how to generate the mind of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, which consists of 3 points. First, of the stages of training in bodhicitta, then the measure of having given rise to bodhicitta, and finally the way to adopt it by means of a ritual, such as, for example, the way to take the vow. So first off, we need to develop the knowledge of how to train in the development of bodhicitta.
대다 딘디게 샘종에 름바들이야 아니 가서 름방 규바들이야 규바 니치어레스 니치단 디나 소마난 신기 아니 조첨분이 규바 라 맹아 균데 둠마탄스 야세 시월리 쇼네 총알 때니 총알 니낭오스.
So the first point is the stage of training in bodhicitta. And this has 2 variations, which means 2 lineages. So the first lineage is the lineage of the 7-fold cause and effect instructions transmitted from Atisha. And the second is the training based on text by the Bodhisattva Shantideva.
들다 잠고라면 총가와 침비다 람름 기 아니 피기다 지코 tuksa yuanamenadi ani choji zebita chanju lamdren la ya hontu na yores ta choji gi chanju lamdren zebi khawdula ya so di ani chetan theba cheju sumgi gi lam gi trosu son yorde so di theba chimbi gi lam an theba chimbi gi lam se gi zawa saben tawdi ani chanju gu sem dinza ani 조 첨부기 데노리아 믹스기 첨부 송다 조 첨부기 잔죽 셈 장안니 투귤라야 아니 가서다 정말 지진 총니 아니 잔주 람름 제바인자 콩기 잔주 셈 총당게 름바디 갈된 총여레스단디 아니 균드레 맹아 듄 공발레 때니 아니 조침비 투귤라야 아니 잔죽 셈도 딱 총발레스 진짜 냠뇽 토니 송샤비기 아니 존수 그름바직디 조챔비기다 근데 맹아 듄디 찍차고 그래스.
Here we're following Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation of the states of the path of enlightenment, the Lamrim text, which is based on Atisha's lamp for the path of enlightenment. So Atisha composed this text, the first Lamrim text, the lamp for the path of enlightenment, and the great Tsongkhapa composed a commentary to that. So in Atisha's lamp for the path of enlightenment, he teaches the paths of the 3 vehicles, but mainly teaches the path of the Mahayana vehicle. And the root of the Mahayana path is bodhicitta. Since Lama Tsongkhapa based his presentation of the Lamrim on Atisha's text, here Lama Tsongkhapa says, he refers to, first of all, the 7-fold cause and effect instructions transmitted from Atisha. In the Tibetan version, by the way, it is said the great Atisha, right? Atisha the great, which is emphasizing the point that Lama Tsongkhapa's text is based on Atisha's text. Now, Atisha gave instructions on the development of bodhicitta. The instructions that Atisha gave in his lamp for the path of enlightenment were the 7-fold cause and effects personal instruction for developing bodhicitta, because he taught it in a way that accorded exactly with the way that Atisha himself developed bodhicitta. So Atisha possessed bodhicitta. He had bodhicitta, and he taught in his lamp for the path of enlightenment the steps of developing it exactly in the way that he did it, in following. So you can say that this practice, 7-fold cause and effect personal instructions, is based on his own experience in the development of bodhicitta.
다 맹아 니버디 야스치무 시발라 야스치무 시발레기다 쫀죽 제요라스라 뭔데 타네기다 아니 딘디기 랍칭기 쇼ンデゼ디 쇼ン디기 다 저자 유나면디 잔주고 셈데리스 대야 야스치모 쇼레 코랑기 비기 아니 잔주고 셈야 장반 만치니 투귤레야다 치마치지 총바이 라 때니 아니 전주고 쇼 짜침부터 제투고라서 딘자 딘디기 잔주고 셈디 계단디 아니 rimba khanda chila lawa islaamdi dagda shen niwati dewan deba dang dunga mundeba jingzong yinba keba pusang yin mebati ani sikshini ani simjan tamje dunga da chawan dehu yansa simjan tamje dunga da char gungdu nyambigi tindigi ta ani dagda shen nyambigi lo di jambala teni simjan tamje dunga da tibi tsewa di toni ani laksam senanda 아니 잔주고 셈디 총바인자 아니 디톤다 더 뇽의 톤 아니 다진 냠지고 로장수 송바인자 렘바니베 데레스.
And here Tsongkhapa also refers to the second lineage, which is training based on the text by the Bodhisattva Shantideva. So Shantideva, the Bodhisattva Shantideva, composed his Bodhisattva way of life, which you can say that it is like a text that composed by the gods. It is a celestial text, so to speak. So if we want to train in bodhicitta, Shantideva says that we can train in bodhicitta in the manner that he explained in his composition, the Gato Bodhisattva way of life, in which, in that text, Shantideva taught the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others, beginning with seeing the equality between oneself and others, that there's no difference whatsoever, even in the slightest, between oneself and others in terms of seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to be free from suffering. And on that basis, since there is no difference whatsoever, even in the slightest between ourselves and others, Shantideva says that we can then develop love to other living beings, wishing them to have happiness. On that basis also, we develop compassion and wholehearted resolve. Shantideva explained how to do that in his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. And this text is based on his own personal experience, teaching us the stages for developing bodhicitta.
Terdinza da dindigida damga ge yuba da zama zangyanjigita ni chong yobanza ni yobanza jamgola mo zongga chembe da janjugu samla ya lo jongwe kabdula ra lo jongwe kabdula ya da janjugu sam pi zo tugyula thoya ge ke ani da soso da ji lendre ji ton yungora da ke zo di ani ki 피기기다 약슈디 아니 땅이 디 통담아 땅에 삼발라 아니 조 챔비고 송비 균제 맹아 듄 공발 때니 아니 종요서레스 딘자 아니 장골 엄청 거 버치비다 람름 첸지 총숨 송위 카둘이야 아니 잔주섬도 로장수 조 균제 맹아 듄게 권이 로장수래 때니 아니 잔주섬 깨당을 버디 조치니 체기어레스 라 이나야 디데 저 냄베 야스침을 시월이 송비기 아니 림바디야 텐텐 아니 냄베데 겨워데네 조디 균제 맹아 듄 장발 때니 공규려야 잔주섬 총반사 아니 조 조지기다 송려야 두고야 딘디지 맨로스 라 띵아 나라 삼주인스.
So here Lama Tsongkhapa provides us with instructions based on two lineages. And those instructions based on those two lineages are instructions on training in the mind of bodhicitta. So then, looking at the conditions that we experience in taking up this practice of bodhicitta, you can say that since we have this karmic connection here in this text with Lama Tsongkhapa, then and Lama Tsongkhapa has based his text on Atisha's Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment, which teaches how to develop bodhicitta using the sevenfold cause and effect personal instructions. Then the best then system, you can say, presented in by Lama Tsongkhapa is the one that came from the great Atisha. Now, Lama Tsongkhapa composed different texts explaining the steps of the path of enlightenment. There is an extensive presentation, a middling presentation, an abbreviated presentation of the steps of the path of enlightenment. And in all of those presentations, it refers to Atisha's sevenfold cause and effect personal instructions method for developing bodhicitta. And of course, he also added to that some instructions which are based on Shantideva's approach for the development of bodhicitta. But Geshe reckons that since Lama Tsongkhapa mainly sources his texts on Atisha's presentation, the main instructions that he gives for the development of bodhicitta is the sevenfold cause and effect personal instructions.
Then so the careers on the Pena Nanzula thinking and Julia, Sewachi Yorwas, Sewachi Yorata, Tinti Hingi big Sewati, Shilashani, and it saves somebody, Yakitambaina, Lelhaj, Yasiyadam younger was. Sometimes Daniel big somebody. Kia di big some things have Madana and the Chitangi Kansajilia, Pekabur was Inaya and a Kaya Malam, missing in Jimbainaya, Susu Nielaya, Sevi Samba Mengi, a Pesci Yomaros, good trauma in Bainaya, and it's Suzuki in a Ringtulaya, Sevi Sambachi, Euros.
And in practicing bodhicitta, we first of all recognize that we work with an innate sense of love or care that we already have. We use that as a base and we increase, we enhance, we take that sense of love and care to another level. So it might seem for the time being that developing a sense of love and care for all sentient beings is a little bit far-fetched, but we recognize, it might be difficult for us to think about it. But first off, we recognize that we begin with a sense of love and care to others that we have already innately. There's no one that is completely free of a sense of care for others, that doesn't have any sense of care for anyone whatsoever. Not only us as human beings, but we can also recognize that also other living beings, isn't it, as far as insects, they're not free of a sense of care for others. So when you look at the insects, you can say that there's, for insects, for example, there is a sense of care for those of the same species.
These are deep kitchen studies, Kansana, Sanji, which the two the Pigita, kitchen should the Muyan Nitsu Shelishan, Chu Korayon Dankora, Muyan Nitsu Shelishan Sombanza, Muyan Nitsu, Rangshin Hingilia, Suzulaya, Yobigi, any Yobadelia Shishan, Sanji Rixing in the Angas Tomaman Yobachilia, Munzichi, the D Shilashani, and Sangiagi, any Tap Shen down the any Rikti Tovita, Sangi of Songo Nanshingi, Kanji, Man Bena, and a Chu Jami, Chumji Tungin down, and a Yashudi, me tenris. Me ten body, and a me pigitachi, and a Lebasanamandu, me Lunkum Loibi, Zala Sovatia, and then draw Shant and Tomamai by Giovanza, and D Tony, and Lo John D, and it mix it was turned to a jet, Tiasongoras, Ra.
And this is a really important point for us to recognize that all sentient beings already innately have a certain degree of care for others. And whatever practice we undertake, we base that practice on an accurate reading of reality. So naturally, innately, all of us have the sense of care for others. Also, we say that all of us innately, since time without beginning and up to now, we have a Buddha nature. So we need to then make use of certain method in order to use them, to use that sense of care for others, to use a Buddha nature in order to attain the state of Buddhahood. So we use them in our Dharma practice, and the best basis, foundation that we can use for our Dharma practice is this human body that we have now, this human support, which means that having a body of a human being, we have a brain, and we also have a system of channels in our body that makes it optimal for us to practice the development of a sense of care for others. And in that sense, we can say that it provides us with this best foundation, better than animals and so forth, for pursuing our own development. And on that basis, we can attain a great result.
Terdenza da ranchi suyebige ani tsewadi shilashanita ani tsewi sambati yagi tangu yobanza ranchi suyebige tsewa kesagi nying tsudi mad chayores anzu drowa khanda jimbaine ta drowe kashi la ya ani bigi mad shujigin mandini deadini ta kashi ngor da gyacha gubchu kodandi zu mal deni ani salon chonggoyachi ro mai tsewal deni chonggoyachi za ani tsewi samba kesagi nying tatwati ani mat chagonza ani mashi sedi ani zujin songwati di shuji be janggol mutsunga bachimbi tulya pap di shuji pendo chong yosare samsa nga samsa dini samgu dosara.
And since we have that natural, unfabricated sense of care for others, this is what we use as a very basis, and we work in order to develop and increase that sense of care that we have to others. And in order to do that, we first off recognize the one that is the closest to us in this life, which, as Lama Tsongkhapa says here, when we think of the person that is the closest one to us, it is a mother. And not only for us as human beings, it is like that also for most living beings. Of course, we can come up with examples of some animals, insects, or what have you that grow up without being that connected to their own mother. But you can say that in most cases, when we look at living beings, most of us grow in having this strong connection with our mothers. So we recognize the first step in the development of Bodhichitta, as Lama Tsongkhapa explains, is the recognition of sentient beings as having been a mother. And Geshe feels that Lama Tsongkhapa saw that step as being so vital, so beneficial, and through that he gave us this explanation. So we will then look at the practice of the sevenfold cause and effect personal instructions for developing bodhicitta, beginning with recognizing a mother in next week's session, right? So in the next few weeks, we're going to look at the sevenfold cause and effect personal instructions. So we might leave the text here for today. So to finish it off, let's recite together the final Lamrim dedication. For my two collections, vast space that I've amassed from working with effort that is practiced for a great length of time, I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose mind's wisdom is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be beheld in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of completed graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice, using skillful means, drawn by the strong force of compassion. May I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I've discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted boundless ease, and may the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time, may even this graded path of enlightenment, completely due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths, never departed in any of the lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.